For 20 years, I've had 3 hummingbird feeders in different locations around my house. 8 weeks ago, the feeder along the side of my house was being drained every night. A Google consensus thought bats were the culprit. But whatever the animal, unless they had the characteristics of a hummingbird, the only way they could get the liquid out of the feeder was by tipping it, so the sugar water drained out the low side, allowing the animal to lap it up. Scrounging through the drawers in my garage, I had to come up with a solution that would make the feeder rigid and keep it from tipping. The connection to the feeder I had already partly solved because the little plastic hook had gotten brittle in the sun and broken off. So I chose to use a 1/4-inch hook with a low-profile nut. If I was going to replace the wire hanger with a 1/4-inch shaft, that part was already solved for. To secure the top, I decided to try cutting a short length of aluminum utility track, drill a hole in the center, and screw it to a 1/2-inch stop collar that could slide over the 1/2-inch shepherd's hook. Here are the various parts, and here is how it came together. Another low-profile nut could slide into the track for quick removal, and a plastic 1/4-inch threaded knob could be used to secure the all-thread to the track. After installing my fabrication, I had to wait until the next morning to see if the feeder still had sugar water in it. Unfortunately, the feeder was bone dry. Now it was time to set up a wildlife camera to see what was going on. I clamped my low-resolution camera to the top of a ladder, and that night, here is what the camera discovered. A red-tailed fox, very rare to this area. Looking at the way he was using his snout to tilt the feeder, I knew I needed to add a second set screw to the stop collar. But more importantly, I realized I would have been better off setting up the camera initially, because a better solution for a fox would have been to move the feeder away from the wall and not waste time making the feeder rigid. But on the off chance a future bat might raid the feeder, I went ahead and drilled and tapped a second set screw and tested to see if the fox could tilt the feeder. From the video, the second set screw seemed to work because the fox could not tip the feeder. But I figured it was only a matter of time before he could learn some other technique because he still had access. Moving the shepherd's hook out 12 inches from the wall was going to be harder than it looked because the ground sloped away from the fence at about a 1-to-1 slope. If I set the feeder out 12 inches, the feeder would drop 12 inches, putting it right at the top of the orange tree. That meant I needed to cut a 2-inch length of PVC pipe, drive it into the ground in order to raise the shepherd's hook 12 inches. As a proof of concept, I clamped a scrap length of 1/2-inch aluminum angle to the shepherd's hook and hung the feeder off the end to see if it put it out of the reach of the fox. I almost felt sorry for the fox because after 3 weeks he had gotten accustomed to having a sugary treat every night. The solution I kept coming back to would be parts originally intended to be used for a fire suppression system, like in a restaurant. A Google search identified exactly the parts I had in mind, and better yet, they were inexpensive and available at Lowe's only a 1/2 mile away. This was an elegant solution because it looked cool, was inexpensive, and relatively easy to install. The first night it was raining, and he knew the extension bar was wet and slippery, so he passed. But the second night he couldn't resist, walked out on the bar, and almost fell on his ass. I laugh every time I see that. But within 5 minutes he figured it out and got his sugar fix. The solution was to lower the top extension bar so the fox could not use it as a plank. Here is how the upper and lower extensions turned out after painting them. But the fox got the last word, showing his displeasure and frustration by taking a dump on the other side of the wall. before bidding his final adieu and exiting stage right.